Are you a L.I.V.E teacher? L.I.V.E teachers not only think outside of the box, they break the box.
Are you a L.I.V.E teacher? A L.I.V.E teacher is someone who never stops learning.
We know that highly efficacious, efficient, and effective educators expect their students to succeed.
Yes, y'all. Watch out!
L.I.V.E, highly efficacious, effective, and efficient educators, is a series of 22 live lessons that focus on different areas of teacher efficacy, advocacy, and support.
L.I.V.E teacher brings fun into the classroom.
L.I.V.E teachers bring excitement to the classroom.
They welcome change into their classroom. They are masters of the subject and the content that they teach. And most importantly, they never stop learning. So again, I ask, are you a L.I.V.E teacher?
We're excited that you can join us, so stay tuned for our upcoming L.I.V.E lessons, and we look forward to learning and growing with you. Thank you.
Yeah, come on. I like that, y'all. The H, the E, the H, the H, the E, I. The H, the E, the H, the H, the E, I. I like that, like that. The H, the E, I. H, I, E, I, H, E, I. Heck yeah. Yes, y'all. Watch out. H-E-Y.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad to see everyone here. Good evening. I'm Lavetta Levels. I bring you greetings from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to the L.I.V.E Summer Learning Series, where our goal is to inform, empower, and encourage educators, families, and all those that have a stake in education. Whether this is your first time joining us, as if you've attended other sessions before, we want to thank you for your presence and your ongoing participation, because we want to learn and grow every night. And tonight is no different. Where are you watching us from? Hey, everyone. I see Atlanta, Georgia's here, Texas, California. We see you. DC, we see you. So make sure that you share the video. Make sure that you tell us where you're watching from, and make sure that you invite other people to participate with us tonight. Tag Keishla, you're it.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to tonight. Now, my name is Keishla Wiley, and I am bringing you greetings from Dallas, Texas, by way of DeSoto, Texas. Again, thank you all for joining us tonight. And Isis, Tag, you're it.
Good evening, everyone. Hello, I'm bringing you greetings from the countryside of Montclair, South Carolina. If you ever wanted to be on Ayana Fix My Life, but you couldn't get on there, tonight is your night. Dr. Ebony White is here to fix your life, and Tag Simone, you are it.
Hey, everybody. I am Simone from the great state of North Carolina. I live in Maryland. We want to thank Isis tonight for being highly efficacious with the red lipstick to represent for us tonight. We are excited. We are excited to look, and I don't even know how they do this stuff. Every single time now. I don't know, but we are very excited that you guys are here. Miss Nevada Taylor, she asked, could she get some CEU credits because she's been going through some series.
Yeah. We got you, Dr. Taylor. Dr. Taylor, we got you.
Yeah, you and me. So y'all have been amazing. And thank you to all of you who have been tuning in. So you're in for a treat tonight. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Ebony White to everybody. Dr. Ebony White is a licensed professional counselor, a national certified counselor, and an approved clinical supervisor. She's an assistant clinical professor in the Department of Counseling and Family Therapy and the program director of the Master in Addictions Counseling Program at Drexel University. As the executive director of the Center for Mastering and Refining Children's Unique Skills, Marcus, a nonprofit organization, she focuses on expanding developmental pathways for at-promise adolescents in Trenton, New Jersey through counseling, mentoring, and tutoring. Clinically, she focuses primarily on issues that impact the relationships and functioning of African Americans, primarily women and teens. She also provides multicultural and mental health training for law enforcement, religious leaders, educators, and community members. Dr. Ebony is a master teen steps trainer, a curriculum designed to improve the functional of teens in healthcare settings. Dr. Ebony's research interests broadly focus on advocacy and social justice within the African American community. Specifically, she is interested in the impact of individual and systematic trauma on the development and functional of individuals and families within the African diaspora nationally and globally. She has done trauma-focused mental health work in Croix-des-Bouquets, I hope I said that right, Haiti, and in her hometown of Trenton, New Jersey. She's appeared on CBS to discuss the impact of mass shootings on mental health, as well as the everyday violence that plagues under-resourced communities in urban settings and the subsequent trauma response that may occur. In 2019, Dr. Ebony was nominated by her peers for the Locke Paisley Outstanding Mentor Award given by the Association for Counselor, Education, and Supervision. In 2007, Dr. Ebony received the Woman of the Year Award from the Mercer County Commissions on Women. Dr. Ebony strongly believes that you have to be at the table to determine the menu and thus hold service positions in several counseling organizations. Dr. Ebony is community focused and strongly identifies as an advocate, counselor, and educator. She recognizes the village that raised her and live by Ubuntu. I am because we are, and because we are, I am. Dr. Ebony is excited to continue the work, and we welcome Dr. Ebony tonight to the
Yes. She's here.
Yes. Dr. Ebony, thank you so much for being a part of our show tonight. We are getting our notepads and our phones ready. We'll have our questions ready. So those of you that are watching, please make sure you have your questions ready when we have VOYB. So Dr. Ebony, we're going to move out the screen and it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Sinane, for that wonderful, wonderful welcome. And just really quickly, I just have to say it's quite a bouquet, Haiti. Shout out to all my people who are in Haiti. Yes, and so it looks like you all can see my screen. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I'll be talking about mental health and trauma in the classroom, specifically how it shows up in the students that we're working with as educators, and how we can, first of all, identify what's happening with our students who are struggling with some mental health issues or who have mental health concerns, and then also how we address those concerns as well. So typically, pre-COVID, this is typically what a classroom would look like, right? You have a teacher, sometimes you have teacher assistants in the classroom, and you have, various students from different backgrounds at the desk. And typically, with the naked eye, what we see are just bodies in seats. And we may notice that our students have unique gifts and talents and all of that, but we typically see the student in their physical form as they are presenting to us. But there are some things that we may not see when they show up in our classrooms. And those things include, we may not know what type of trauma they are experiencing in their communities. I know the community in which I grew up in, there was a lot of violence. It was plagued by violence. And so oftentimes there would be a shooting or something violent that occurred the night before, and I would go to school the next day and perform and function as if that was just the normal thing. And some of our students are experiencing that. Some of our students have mental health diagnoses such as ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or other concerns that makes it difficult for them to focus. And so sometimes we may misrepresent or mischaracterize a student as a bad student when they're really having some internal struggles that's impacting and impeding their ability to focus on the content. You have students who have even more severe mental health responses or mental health diagnoses, such as depression. And so they're struggling with thoughts that they don't have the language to determine at the time. So the one bubble on top of the student's head that says, nobody sees it, I'm dead inside. And so sometimes many students, they don't have words like depression or anxiety or trauma in their vocabulary. And if they do, they don't have a full understanding of what those things are. And so they have these words or these feelings that they describe in this way. And also we know that many of our students have family issues that they may be experiencing. I'm not saying that this is typical of all students in your classroom. What I am saying is that we don't know what's happening with our students when they are struggling. And so now we are faced with online education given COVID, right? And so given COVID, now teachers are going to be behind their screens, or teachers have been behind their screens educating students. And whereas when they're in the classroom, it may be easier to pick up on some of the issues and some of the concerns that they are experiencing behind a screen, that can be a little bit more difficult. And so everything that I am discussing today, I want you to think about the context of COVID now behind it, and how that might present a barrier or obstacle in the way that you teach, in the way that students learn as well. And so here are just a couple of things that I'm going to cover today. So of course, recognizing signs and symptoms of mental health issues, right? I know that we know the common phrase that our people suffer from a lack of knowledge. Sometimes behavior is misrepresented because we don't understand what's happening with our students. And so I want to make sure that I present you with some signs and symptoms of mental health issues that you can look out for in the students that you are working with. And I understand that it's going to be a little bit more difficult now given COVID and not knowing how that's going to impact how we're educating our students. Secondly, I never leave my audiences without any strategy. So of course, I'm going to teach some effective strategies to work with students who may be experiencing mental health issues. And of course, I'm going to define that in a few seconds. Also, understand and identify specific ways racism and discrimination impact mental health. Although this is something that has been extremely relevant for a very, very long time, I think that this has been amplified given the other pandemic, the racial pandemic that is alive and well in our country today, that certainly impacts functioning of our students and impacts functioning of our teachers as well. Also discussing strategies for getting support from administrators, and then incorporating advocacy into your educator identity, just talking about what that means, and hopefully encouraging you to do some self-reflection and introspection on how you can incorporate advocacy into the educator identity. And so, first of all, it's important to understand that mental health is a continuum. Oftentimes, when I say the term mental health, if I ask people in the room, when I say mental health to you, what comes to mind? People automatically start talking about mental illness. They'll say, oh, depression, crazy, anxiety. They'll start naming mental health illness instead of talking about what mental health or mental wellness is. So it's important to understand that mental health does not mean mental illness. It is really an assessment of how you are doing and how you are coping. And so because it is a spectrum, it means that mental health is on one end and mental illness is typically on the other end. And what do I mean by that? Mental illness is something that is diagnosable. And so you could be having mental health issues and not be diagnosed with a mental health illness. And so although we have healthy on one end of the spectrum and psychosis on the other end of the spectrum, it's important to know that most people fall in the middle. So most people aren't healthy, mentally healthy, and most people don't suffer from psychosis, which is, delusions of grandeur and hallucinations. Most people struggle right there in the middle, where it says adjustment issues and neurosis. And adjustment issues are really the brunt of what we encounter and what we experience in our lives. And so what are adjustment issues? If you think about any transitions that occur in your life, and particularly if we're thinking about our students, even simply going from 4th grade to 5th grade, or from elementary school to middle school, or moving, things of that nature, those are all adjustments. And everybody adjusts at a different rate, at a different space, at a different pace. Excuse me. And so some students may do well making that transition from elementary school to middle school, while others struggle with that and need more support. And so when you think about any moment in your life that there's a transition, there is not a likelihood, but there's an opportunity for adjustment issues to occur. So we all experience varying degrees of mental health at different points in our life. So what does that mean? Loss is a part of life, right? So we have all experienced loss in some form or fashion. And during loss, some people may exhibit symptoms of depression, right? And so that is a disruption in your mental health and mental wellness. Now, some people are able to cope and carry that loss better than others, or in more adaptive ways than others. However, there is a disruption in your mental health and your mental wellness at that moment. I already said most people fall in the middle, and this point is so important because a lot of times we play this us-them game that really separates us more than it brings us together, right? I'm not crazy like that. I don't have those kinds of issues. And so it's important to understand that although there are risk factors that can result in mental health concerns, given the right circumstances, anybody can become mentally ill. And I mean a diagnosable mental illness, right? So we never know what that flip is and that switch is in somebody's mind that we could flip, and all of a sudden they're having issues where they need more support, right? When we think about trauma has less to do with what the incident is and more to do with the response to that incident. So what are some signs and symptoms? And I'm going to try to get through these a little quick because I really want to get to the meat of the presentation. But these are just a list, and hopefully you can see all of those, of signs and symptoms to look out for when working with students, okay? And even if you want to do an examination of yourself as well, but certainly when working with students. And so feeling very sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks, if you notice that you're working with a student who's typically outgoing and gregarious, right? And all of a sudden they're more inside of themselves, it's important to take note of that. Out of control or risk-taking behavior. So engaging in activities or behaviors that can be seen as risky or harmful, even if they don't see it as such. If you notice any changes in weight or eating habits, severe mood swings, drastic changes in behavior or personality, extreme difficulty in concentrating or staying still, right? And so many of the students that we work with, and I'll talk about this later, have experienced different types of trauma in their life. And unfortunately, trauma response can look a lot like a behavioral issue or a behavioral problem. And so it's important to have this knowledge so that when you're working with the student, these students aren't all just being written off as behavioral issues and sent to the disciplinarian, but that we can actually do the work that needs to be done to ensure that they're getting the services that they need. If I need to come back to this at the end where there's a question portion, I certainly will. But here's just a list of things for you to look out for. All right. And so context, as we know, is extremely important. And so these are the things that impacts development. And so not just identity development, personal development, right? All these things impact human development. And these are all the systems that impact human development. And on here, I define what each of the systems are: microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, and macrosystem. And as you can see, that macrosystem is that larger system of written and unwritten rules that filter down and impact every single system beneath it. And so that means that racism impacts how I develop as an individual, impacts how I see myself as an individual. It impacts how I show up in the classroom. It impacts even how I think my teacher looks at me or views me in that classroom, because it filters down. So not only are the relationships inside of my home important, the relationships inside of my school are important. The relationships within my community are important. My relationship with government is important. All of these things interact with one another, and it impacts functioning and development. And so why am I bringing that up? It is important to understand that as educators, and I'll make this point again later, as educators, yes, it's important to teach, particularly because of all the policies and things that are in place that are really focused on outcomes. But also it's important to understand that you cannot teach without teaching within that context, without bringing that context within the classroom, because racism is in the classroom, whether we talk about it or not. Family issues are in the classroom, whether we talk about it or not. And so it's important to have these spaces within our educational system where we can address the whole student and support the whole student while we are providing education. Oh, and then the chronosystem, excuse me, I left one out, is the passage of time. So the process of time, how does that impact people? And so here is one strategy. I'm going to provide two. Here is one strategy to help foster not just positive relations with students, but also help foster positive identity development in the students that we are working with, right? And so there's a strategy called positive youth development, and it has 5 prongs. It has 5 prongs, and they are competence, confidence, connection, caring, and character. And all 5 of these things are really important, but I just want to focus on 2 today. And those 2 are connection and caring. And I'm seeing that people are writing on the bottom that connections are key, and they really, really are. I'm glad that you all have already picked up on that. And so connection. How can you develop a connection with your students and support your students, particularly those who may be struggling with various issues as you are working to educate them, right? And so it's important to familiarize yourself. And I know that many educators already do this, but it is important to familiarize yourself with your students if you can. And I suggest and I urge you to do so before you step into that classroom, whether that is a physical space or an online space. Try to get to know something about your students and learn about your students, their families, and their communities before you go into that classroom. And so for students who already have been identified as students who need more support, read those files before the start of the year, okay? If there's a 504 plan, an IEP, red flags that have been developed, know that about your student before you go into the classroom. And so sawubona is something that I talk about often, and it really just means I see you. And I know that I always say this in my presentations. I always talk about this because I hold it near and dear to my heart, and it is so important. I had a session today with a client who said they did not feel seen. Being seen is so important. And how do you see students? First, you have to, give respect. Respect their culture, their values, and respect them as equal to yours. A lot of times when we go into classrooms, we have, these values that we were raised with ourselves, and we like to place them onto our students. Now, I'm not saying change yourself and change how you manage a classroom. What I'm saying is it's important to know where your students are coming from, what they value, what's important to them, and what moves them. And so even if their behavior is destructive, recognize that it is adaptive. One of my favorite psychologists, Dr. Thomas Parham, he always says that an abnormal response to an abnormal situation is a normal response. And so if you are thinking about the world that we are living in today, which is completely crazy, if you ask me, and people are having a myriad of responses, most of those responses are valid, even if they seem destructive, because the situation in itself doesn't make a lot of sense. And so it makes sense that the response also doesn't make sense. So also remember that their actions, their behaviors might be a normal response to the situation. And so even if it's not the way that you respond to the situation, given your social location, it may be normal where they come from in their community, within their home. And so it's important to understand that. Also, with just generation X, Y, Z, all the different names, loyalty is top priority. And so they have to feel like their teachers, their educators are there and have their back. So these are just some of those things that they live by: family over everything, right? That loyalty is just so important to them. And Ubuntu, as was read in my bio, is also important in order to see students that I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am. You cannot be an effective educator if you see yourself as separate from your students. You cannot be an effective educator if you see yourself as separate from your students. You have to understand that you are connected to them and they are connected to you, and also treat them and educate them and support them as such. And so with their relationship, if you make a promise, an assertion, if you tell them something, you have to stick by your word and make sure that you live up to it, because it builds trust. And students will do anything, almost anything for you if they trust you. There's a common saying that says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that is very, very true. And also, whoever is important in their lives, their relationships, parents, guardians, make sure that you try to develop and maintain relationships with them, and not just for negative things. I know some educators, sometimes we struggle with reaching out consistently and only reach out when we have a problem to report. And so that it doesn't serve the relationship well, not just with their parents and guardians, but also with the student. Also, make sure you're approaching guardians in a respectful way. And the first time you speak to them should not be to tell them that something is wrong with their child. Caring, and this is just, it's very connected to connection, right? And I saw this pop up earlier. Relationship is key. The relationship is key. Like I said earlier, you can get students to do almost anything for you if they trust you. Also, you want to make them aware that you notice notice changes in them, right? And so I know typically within the classroom, if a student typically sits in the front or in the middle row or wherever they sit, and they change their seat, and it's something drastic, like a student who's just sitting in the front is now sitting in the back, don't let that go unnoticed. Don't let that go unspoken. You want to highlight that. You want to let them know, Sawabona, I see you. I see you. What's going on? Even when you are correcting or addressing an issue with the student, always begin with a positive, such as, you're really smart, and I see you stop doing your homework. So not even a but, because the but, as we know, negates what was before the but. You are so smart, and I'm wondering what's going on with your homework, right? Even when you are correcting them, when you are addressing them, always start with something positive. And always really try to ask what you can do instead of telling them what they should do, right? So how can I support you? How can we help you be successful in this classroom, right? What do you need to move forward? What's going on? What's getting in the way? Tell me how I can be there for you, or how the class can be there for you. Create community in the classroom so that everyone is accountable and responsible for one another. It's also important because, as I said earlier, mental health has become so taboo, particularly in communities of color, that we talk about mental health frequently in your classrooms. Use it in lesson planning if possible, so that when you say words like depression, anxiety, things of that nature, it doesn't feel strange to students or weird to students, or it doesn't seem like a taboo topic. Also, for students who are known to have struggles, it makes them feel less singled out in those spaces. It's also important to talk about, if you want, a way to incorporate this is to talk about well-known people that they may respect or look up to, who struggle with mental health issues as well. This next strategy, the HELP strategy, is actually a strategy that I developed. And of course, it's an acronym because I'm an educator too. So I live on acronyms. And so this strategy is actually in one of the Phyllis journals. So the 2016 edition of the Phyllis Journal, and the name of the article is Trauma in the Classroom, Introducing a New Strategy for Teachers. And so the HELP strategy, stands for hear, empathize, lesson, L-E-S-S-E-N, plan, and sustain. And so here requires basic training in identifying signs and symptoms, which now many of you already have, because it's important to know what to look for. Now, also hearing involves responding as well, right? And so if you ever had a student come to you to tattletale or tell on somebody, or if you have any children and they said, Johnny hit me, or Johnny took my cookie, they're not looking for you to just say, okay. They're looking for you to do something to Johnny, right? And so hearing not just requires an understanding, but it also requires action on an educator's part. And so after you hear, you have to empathize, try to understand the student's perspective as them, right? So not if it were you in their shoes, because if you just say, you know what, I know what it's like to be in your shoes, then you really don't know what it's like for them, because you only know what it's like to be yourself with different shoes on, right? And so try to understand the student's perspective as the student, and also increase feelings of acceptance in the student as well. Many of our students, as we know, particularly because of social media and things of that sort, are already struggling with their identity, with self-esteem, with self-efficacy, things of that nature. And so you want to help to increase the feelings of acceptance in the student, right? Not beating them down or not saying something is wrong with them, right? And then also lesson, try to draw attention away from the student. So if you understand the student is struggling and they may be causing a disruption in the class, you want to try to take the heat off of them, or the visual off of them. So have stress relief tools available in the classroom, such as stress balls. I know some teachers are against the fidget spinners, but there's a thing called a fidget box or a fidget cube that helps to ground students as well, or clay that can help to, something malleable that can help to ground students as well. And it also may include brief vacations for the student, right? And so some students really, really, really do struggle to stay still. And so maybe make that student the teacher helper, right? And this is when you're in the classroom. It's important for you to think about the context of COVID and how you might be able to execute this in an online space, even if it's giving them a lot of breaks from the screen time, okay? And so including brief vacations, like, oh, can you take this down to the office for me? Or can you sharpen the pencils? Or, anything of that nature. And then it's important to plan implementation and execution. So not only do you link up with everybody who is going to be on the support team for the students, so their guardians, it even could be a peer who they identified as someone they respect and look up to, educators, the school social worker, or what have you. Once that plan is developed with that whole team, including the student, and it's implemented, you have to make sure you execute it as you said you would and be consistent. So even if it's only one teacher or one educator who noticed this issue, likely that's not the case. You want to make sure all of the educators and all of the people that the student interacts with in that facility is aware of that plan and can support them. Because as the last letter says, as sustained, consistency is key, and it allows them to feel a semblance of control, oftentimes when there's a lack of control in other areas of their life. And so then you have the advocacy identity. And so I really want you to think about this, and I'll spend some time here on this slide, because I think oftentimes people in the helping professions, and I do consider education a helping profession, we think about our role in a singular way, right? And so it is important to understand that as a part of our role, we have to take on an advocacy identity, right? So I'm not just a therapist. I'm a therapist who advocates. I'm not just an educator. I'm an educator who advocates. I'm not just a nurse. I'm a nurse who advocates, right? So how do we incorporate this advocacy identity into our identities as educators, as school psychologists, as principals, right? I'm not just a principal. I'm a principal who advocates. And so educator role has often been limited to the classroom. And as I said earlier, I know that there has been a lot of policies and craziness that has really pushed teachers to teach just to test instead of teaching to educate. And so it's important that we open up what it means to be an educator, right? As if we don't already ask you to do enough, but open up what it means to be an educator, right? How can I support the whole student as an educator? So teaching material, yes, that's one part of the role, but remember, relationships are key. And building relationships along the hierarchy are what's going to result in affecting change within your various school systems or wherever you are working, right? And so not only is it important for you to have community relationships with the students and their families, right? It's important for you to have relationships with your peers and with the administrators in your school as well, right? Because those relationships are going to be what pushes change forward. And so, yes, it takes courage to advocate. And I think now more than ever, we need that courage in our systems. And so it's important to not just teach to educate or teach to test, but also teach to empower. And so I was able to get through that. I saw that I had some time running out. And so hopefully I made the time cue, but hopefully I was able to give you some information, some knowledge that you'll be able to take with you as you go back into your classrooms, whether that is in a virtual space or in a face-to-face space, or as you return to whatever role you have that involves working with our students. So thank you for your time today. And I hope that that was meaningful and you learned something. Thank you.
Dr. Ebony, you did an amazing job. And sometimes I always like, God, why I get with the presentation that makes me want to cry? Because as an educator, there was a lot of things you said that really touched me, especially about the behavior where we don't know, what's going on with them and we think it's a behavior problem. So it's like, this was an introspective look at me as an educator, going back to the school and making sure that I'm an advocate. So I sincerely appreciate it. I took lots of notes. I couldn't write fast enough. So when you have another session, I'm going to sign myself up because I need this. So thank you so much, guys. If you see her website is scrolling at the bottom. Please reach out to her. Look at her resources because this is a wealth of knowledge. And as an educator, sometimes you feel like, oh my God, there's just more to know. But the more we know, the better advocates we really can be for students and the better we can be as teachers. So thank you so, so much. Now this is a part of our show called BYOV. And this is where you can definitely engage with Dr. Ebony. Tell her how much she helped you, how much this information was good. Your questions, please put your questions here. And so we'll get right into our BYOV. So Dr. Ebony, if you want to, I'll remove your.
Stop sharing.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay.
Awesome.
And so I will do the first question here and then we can just keep going.
Awesome.
Okay. So what new obstacles do COVID-19 and the racial pandemic bring to addressing mental health in the classroom?
So I'll start with the first part first because it's the easiest one to address. And so I think obviously it's changed how we taught. Although there was online school, of course, before COVID hit, it pushed all school to really be virtual. And, sometimes people aren't as savvy in those technological spaces. And sometimes this computer screen brings a barrier between you and the student. So you can't really control so much that interaction. And it may be more difficult to manage the classroom in that space. Also, it's brought health to mind, right? And so we tend to be gregarious and wanting to socialize with one another. And now, especially I would say people of color, we'll hug our students, right? To let them know we care. We'll grab onto them. And it's really, we're afraid now to do that because of all that's going on. And so we can't even engage in that way. And so that's certainly an obstacle that could really impact the connection piece that I was talking about, or the connection and caring, particularly if you are someone who wants to connect with your students in that way. Yeah. The racial pandemic, and like I said earlier, this is not anything new that has been going on in our society, but I think that because it has always been kind of this undercurrent for such a long time, it was easier to ignore and not have to bring in the space, right? And now, because of how amplified it is, everybody's talking about it. Yeah. You have to talk about it. You have to address it. It's in our faces at this moment. And so it's not only going to impact how we're interacting with our students, it's impacting how we're interacting with each other as educators, how we're interacting with administration, how we're interacting within communities, right? Because the air is electrified given the incidences that are occurring.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask another follow-up question. We'll go to the second question. But you talked about something. You said even though we don't talk about family issues, even though we don't talk about racism, it's still in the classroom. So what would you say to an educator who they kind of know us in the classroom, but they just don't know how to approach it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there are a bunch of tools online. You know, Google is people's best friend nowadays. There are so many tools online that are available and accessible to educators about how to bring up these topics, right? And if we don't want to take up too much time in our classrooms, we can help create a space in our education system or in our different facilities where those conversations can happen. One of my favorite strategies, now I'm an educator, but you know, at college level and before my classes, I do a check-in, like what's going on. And I say, you know, this time frame is for us to talk about this stuff, right? And if it comes up somewhere along the way, you're right. It does take skill to be able to say, you know what, you're right. That is an issue. I understand it's hard to focus given what's going on around. So you're absolutely right. Do you need a break? Do we need to stretch? Do we need to play some music? You know, how do we do this? But we can't ignore the issues that are so heavy and so impactful in our lives today.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So here's the second question. How can teachers ensure they're addressing their mental health while supporting students?
So this is a very important question. And, you know, some of my DTech folks know that I did a whole presentation on teacher mental health a few years ago with them. Burnout is a very real thing, right? Not only are teachers tasked with managing their own homes, but they have to manage their classroom space and their students' problems, and it can yield to a lot of frustration within them, right? And so sometimes there are some kids, some students that can, you know, really raise your blood pressure and take you to that limit. And so it's important to do a self check-in on a daily basis. This is the tool that I'm talking about. Before you step foot in the classroom, whether you do that sitting in your car before you walk into the door, whether you do that now in your bathroom, in your bedroom before you start teaching, do a check-in with yourself. Where am I today on a scale of 1 to 10? How am I feeling? Right? What am I bringing with me into the classroom today that might impede my effectiveness? Right? And try to do some deep breathing or whatever you need to do to release that before you go into the classroom. And then at the end of your day, you want to do that again, right? What student am I struggling to connect with and why? Is that about the student? Is that about me? Right? What do I need to do to address the stuff that's going on with me? Maybe I need to seek a counselor, right? And that's okay to need to want to seek more support so that the issues that are rising up and educators aren't bleeding into the classroom.
Thank you so much. Now, I know you shared earlier about, you know, given any circumstance that anybody can have diagnosed mental illness. So what did you say to the person who perhaps something traumatic has happened to them and there really is an issue where there's a mental illness, but they're feeling ashamed or they're feeling embarrassed to go and get help? What is something that you can say to encourage somebody to really seek help for themselves?
And so I said this earlier. First, I would applaud them for being brave enough to bring that to me, or even if they didn't bring it to me, I just noticed it. I would applaud them for steadily coming to a space, even though they're carrying all of this on them. And then I would tell them that what they are experiencing is normal, right? Like I said earlier, an abnormal response to an abnormal situation is a normal response. What you are having is a normal response to the situation, to what's going on. And then I would say, what do you need from me? How can I support you? And if they don't know, as an educator, you know, have those resources ready. You know what? I can connect you to boom, boom, and that. Do you need me to talk to your parent? Do you need me to talk to your, right? I can connect you and send you to, or get you hooked up in the right space. And for some people, I think about, you know, I'm a church guy, I grew up in a church, and I remember doing altar calls. Some people who wanted to go up were afraid to go up, and a buddy would go up with them, right? You can say, you know what? Do you need me to drive? Do you need me to go with you? If that's, you know, an option, do you need me to help you set up the appointment? Or is it okay if I connect you with somebody who could help you with that? Just be there, be present, and always start with how do you need me to support you?
Wow, that's good. That's good. Thank you so much. And the last question, and I'll turn it over to Miss Lavetta. So at the beginning, one of the things you told us about connecting is looking at the child's CUNE folder or folders before school happens. What if, you know, a teacher is not able to get that information? What is one other way that you think we can connect with prior to school starting?
So maybe not prior to school starting, but first day of class, you can give out a worksheet, or you can do like a Google Doc quiz if you're doing a virtual space where you're asking open questions that have nothing to do, or maybe have little to do with the actual subject, right? Even though one of those questions should always be, how do you learn best? Right?
Okay.
If you're having a bad day, what's the best way? You can ask those questions. What did your favorite teacher do that really helped you? And what was the least favorite thing your teacher did to, when you're experiencing a problem? And then also always ask them something special about them. I like to ask, what's your favorite movie and why, or what's your favorite song, right? Just to get to know them, and you can bring those characters into the classroom as well.
Okay, thank you so much. So my team is telling me that we have some questions in the comments. So if y'all can help me, I don't see. Okay, here's one right here. Okay, as a middle school counselor, what are some suggestions for transitioning rising 6th grade students into middle school in the remote setting?
Okay, and so it's important to, and I know most students are technologically savvy today, but it's important to gauge not just how savvy they are, but also, do they have the resources they need to navigate that environment, right? Do they have a space at home to learn from, or a space to learn from, whether it's at home or in the library or whatever? Do they have the tools they need, such as a computer, right? All of those things. Also, it's important to recognize, studies that show, you can't sit at the screen for more than 30 minutes, whatever. So it's important to incorporate breaks into the classroom. And you can also always do a survey at checkpoints throughout the school year to say, okay, what's going well? And what's not going so well? What do you need from me? Now, if the student is having anxiety and things of that nature, there are many tools that you can provide for them. And I don't mean anxiety, a diagnosable disorder of anxiety, but just anxious about starting the school year. There are deep breathing techniques, there are grounding techniques that are certainly appropriate for you to model in the classroom. You can start every class by doing a deep breathing exercise. You can start every class by doing a shaking exercise, just to get people's anxieties down, and always have something proactively prepared to help students. And so saying, if anybody needs a break, or if you are having struggles, or if you are having issues, do this so that I know, this is what you need, if that makes sense.
Yes. Thank you so much. Okay. So Isis says, how can I better support parents of multiple children that are now teaching at home that haven't dealt with their own childhood trauma?
Ooh, that is a good one. So family counseling, individual counseling. And so you as an educator, it's important to have a resource list, right? Or a paper or a document on your computer where you are connected to the community, where you know who takes what insurance, if they need Medicaid or Horizon, you know who you can do a soft handoff to the family. And the great thing about having to do things from home is that nobody really has to leave their space to get services anymore. There's so many counselors who are doing telehealth sessions. And then there's also organizations that can help with childcare and things of that nature for low cost. So really it's about knowing what resources are within the community to assist the family. And then if you have a relationship, or if you have developed a relationship with that parent, gently encourage, like, you know what, you are doing, again, start positive. You are doing such a good job dealing with these kids, particularly if you have your own stuff going on. How can I support you? I know this person in the community, and I think that may be a good, what are your thoughts about that?
Thank you. And here is the last one. It says, when middle school brown and light complexion girls target dark complexion girls, is that classism with racism? It becomes a feeding frenzy in some cases. What approach should a teacher take outside of counseling referral?
So this is that macro system coming into the individual development, right? And so it's important to understand that when it's within community, it's called colorism, but colorism is a direct result of racism, right? And so we know that complexion carries currency. And in our society, the whiter you are, the more privilege you have. And that thing, it becomes internalized. And so I call it the plantation mentality, whereas we know during slavery, those who were deemed as less attractive were also often the people who were darkest. And those were the people who had the most laborious, the most laborious tasks, whereas those who were fairer skinned were giving less tasks. And so that stuff, that's why I said we have to understand our history. That stuff, it seeps into our functioning and it messes with our mentality because we start to internalize those beliefs and we begin to act that out. So what can you do? The question left, but I think the question was, what can I do as an educator? And it's important to talk about that openly within the classroom, saying, you know what, I noticed something. What is that about? And then giving that history lesson to tie to it. When you do that, this is what you're doing. Remember I said that you cannot see yourself as separate from your students? It's important to create communities in the classroom too, saying, listen, when you say that to her, you're not just hurting her, you're hurting you. You're hurting our community. You're hurting our class. You're hurting me, right? Yeah. And so really bringing in those conversations. There are also group activities that address this as well.
Wow. Dr. Ebony, you shared so much good stuff. Thank you so much. On behalf of the L.I.V.E team, I want to say thank you for your wealth of knowledge. Thank you for your openness to share. Thank you for sharing with such efficacy, efficiency, and effectiveness. You know your stuff. You are deserving of all the accolades. And so on behalf of the team, I want to say thank you so very much. Please stay with us until the very end. I'm going to invite Loretta to come back. And it was a pleasure again to have you on L.I.V.E tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Wow, that was amazing. I hope you all really paid attention to Dr. Ebony White. I hope that you go to her website, ebonywhite.com, drebonywhite.com. Please go to her website. She has excellent resources there. She offers professional development. I can't imagine a teacher today with everything that's going on that doesn't have this type of resource information. I think that is so on time that we are dealing with, especially with George Floyd and everything that's been going on with Black Lives Matter. It is so important that we are better prepared and more prepared than we were in the spring. It's important that when we see these signs and symptoms that she shared with us, that we already know that we need to have a plan in place. And I'm going to also say, as educators, go ahead and plan for that now. Already anticipate that there will be a situation that you need to make a referral. Get with your campus counselor, find out about your community resources, and be able to make that soft pass onto the counselor so the counselor can make that soft pass onto one of those communities resources, be it a church, be it a counseling center. It's so important. So I want to thank you all for participating. Make sure you complete the survey. The survey link is rolling. We're going to go ahead and let's have some giveaways from those persons that participated in last week's survey. Let's see, who do we have today? I'm going to share my screen just a second. Y'all know it's going to take me just a minute. Now I can share my screen. Well, I thought I was ready. Give me just a minute, y'all. There we go. Awesome. Okay, so we are going to see who the winner is, if this will let me do that. Okay, Valerie Morgan. So Valerie is our first winner from last week. Congratulations, Valerie. And let's see who the next one is. So that's our tag, you're it. Let's try this one more time. Let's see if we can get another winner. Give us just a second here. Let's get a winner. Oh, okay, we'll go ahead and give it to Chrisada Glover. So congratulations to Valerie and to Chrisada. We want to congratulate both of you for winning tonight. And everyone, please make sure that you complete the survey. Again, on this Thursday, Dr. White did a phenomenal job today. Remember, she has 2 areas that she's an expert in: trauma. She works with educators. She works with teens. She works with youth. And I like the fact that she also has expertise in the area of working with law enforcement and crisis. So she's going to bring all that expertise on Thursday, working with a youth panel. We're going to bring students together from K through 12, and they're going to share their hopes and their dreams and what they want for the school year, their concerns. They have a voice. And so on Thursday night, bring all of your students. We want you to invite your family, grandparents, your teachers, educators, community members, church members. We want everyone to come in on Thursday night to hear Dr. Ebony White as she moderates this panel. We have Miss Broderick Knox that's coming with us, Mr. Braxton Lee, Miss Morgan Lee, Mr. Cutie himself, Mr. Joshua Bowens, and Mr. even more cute himself, Mr. Caden Barnett Rush. So Thursday is going to be a phenomenal evening. Make sure you invite everyone, share the video, and thank you for participating. Let's bring the L.I.V.E crew back up. Everybody come back. Again, we want to thank Dr. White, and we thank everybody for participating. Good night.
Night. Have a good night.
Good night.
We gotta fight against them, but we need numbers. We need to show up at school board meetings. We need to show up at county commissioner meetings. We need to have someone on the agenda to talk and know what they're talking about to advocate.
So that's the whole goal, just to be better, to come with the new knowledge, come with the new awareness,